That's interesting. Oh,
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host with the toast, Rye Toast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's, as we always do. If you notice, the microphone is in a different position, and I might sound very insignificantly different. I recently bought a preamp, and because of that, I'm able to have the microphone not directly in my face. It's still pretty close to my face, but on camera, it looks like it just moved 2 inches this way, but it's like a good inch or two away from me now. So you can see more of my face. I think in retrospect, as much as I love this microphone and as good as it sounds, I probably should have bought a shotgun microphone so I could have had it out of the shot pointed at me instead of the microphone where I have to be right up and close to it to be heard. But it's a good microphone, so what can you do? I think I still need to upgrade my interface, and then potentially I can have it like here instead of like right here. But yeah, we're talking about Five Nights at Freddy. Specifically, moving further along in the timeline, I wanted to kind of cover the security breach era of Five Nights at Freddy's and talk about who, if any, or rather which, if any, animatronics are currently possessed in the timeline. Because it's a question I see a lot, and it's kind of informs a lot about how you see the timeline, considering, like, are there any spirits in play? If so, what are those spirits possessing? And I figure we can just go through the whole security breach roster one by one, figuring out if they are possessed. And I think the easiest question, personally, is to start with the Glamrock animatronics. So that's Glamrock Freddy, Glamrock Chica, I almost said Rockstar Freddy. We're going to talk about him later. I just had a brain fart. Montgomery Gator, Roxanne Wolf, and you could argue the daycare attendant Sun Moon is considered a Glamrock. And you could argue Music Man and DJ Music Man, and by extension the Mini Music Men are Glamrocks. And I think that covers all of the Glamrock animatronics. And I say it's a pretty easy discussion because I would argue, personally, I don't think any of them are possessed. I think we can put, oh my God, there's a parade happening above me. So sorry about the audio, but I need to record this now, so it's getting recorded now. We'll put Glamrock Freddy aside because I think he's more of an interesting conversation. But as far as Glamrock Chica, Monty, Roxy, DJ Music Man, the Mini Music Man, and Sun Moon, I feel pretty confident in saying that none of them are possessed. To me, all of their actions line up pretty well with the idea that Glitchtrap has repurposed their programming to do its bidding, right? The idea of these are animatronics who are highly, highly advanced, built off of, most likely, an AI program, the Mimic. And they have been modified to do the bidding of this digital creation. And I don't see any reason to look past that, because I don't see any of the Glamrocks, besides Glamrock Freddy, doing anything that warrant, okay, this doesn't make sense with that explanation. Personally, that's where I'm at. Because even like the DJ Music Men, they're monitoring the vents, probably for Vanny, since it seems like she's the one that let them out. DJ Music Man is literally just doing his programming, and Glitchtrap probably just cranked it up to 11. Because we get that note that DJ Music Man has a built-in security software. Moon is interesting. I wouldn't say Moon seems possessed, but it does seem to me that Moon is the part of Sun Moon that is hacked by Glitchtrap, and Sun is along for the ride, much like Vanny and Vanessa, to be fair. I wonder if it was probably done on purpose to kind of be a foreshadow for Vanny and Vanessa. But none of those animatronics do anything that make me go, okay, being hacked doesn't explain this. I think being hacked explains all that perfectly. The conversation does change when we talk about Glamrock Freddy. I've seen a lot of people, And I've brought this up before. I don't remember. I got to start writing down what I say because, like, oh God, I've been making weekly FNAF videos and now twice a week because of the podcast. But I've been making a weekly FNAF video for over 2 years. I've been making a podcast for 4 months. I say so much shit. And I'm starting to just forget the things I've said. Where someone will be like, hey, 7 months ago, you said this in a theory. And I'll be like, I did? Who said that? Me? So apologies if this is tread ground. But when talking about Glamrock Freddy, I think it is notable and it's a worthwhile discussion on, is Glamrock Freddy possessed? You could explain that. I've seen a lot of people talk about when I found myself when I was digging the hole. Kind of that moment at the end of Security Breach where Glamrock Freddy is taking Gregory down to the FNAF 6 location, and he kind of talks about his friends are down here, they're confused and angry as we're looking at the blob. You know, he's like, I found myself for the first time when I dug the hole. I think that it's a valid theory that in approaching the FNAF 6 location, Glamrock Freddy becomes possessed. And I've seen a lot of people say, okay, that's Michael. And that's fair. I've said it before, I don't personally think that's true. And it's not necessarily that I have great evidence against it. Oh, you know what? I did talk about this because I talked about it last week when discussing MatPat's timeline. That makes sense. So I'll just touch on it briefly because my opinion hasn't changed since last week. That being, there isn't any specific evidence against Glamrock Freddy. I just think it's more likely and more thematically, it lines up more thematically that Glamrock Freddy is instead a AI that is going rogue for good. And that way it's the foil to the Mimic, which is AI, which is going rogue for bad, essentially. It's a really good parallel between the Mimic and Glamrock Freddy. And that's the main reason. I think because we have a lack of concrete evidence to tell us what is happening to Glamrock Freddy, I think leaning on thematic elements is valid. And that's kind of where I go, where I think all the weird stuff that Glamrock Freddy does can be explained by either him being possessed or him being an AI going rogue for good. So when we don't have great evidence to specifically say what direction that goes, thematically, I think it lines up better that he is just AI going rogue. So that's my thoughts on the Glamrocks, which, I mean, that was super quick, but like, besides Glamrock Freddy, it's pretty straightforward, I would say, to say that the other Glamrocks are not possessed. You could argue, especially after Ruin, Roxy seems interesting. Roxy seems like she may be possessed. I disagree. I think the behavior that Roxy exhibits in Ruin is a sign that Glitchtrap's hold on these animatronics is going away. Or at least after the damage that they have suffered, the hold isn't as strong anymore. And I think that's why Glitchtrap has us deactivate Roxy, because Glitchtrap recognizes that Roxy is a threat. Roxy is breaking free. She's essentially doing what Glamrock Freddy did at the beginning of Security Breach, where she is infected with Glitchtrap and then gets snapped out of it in some way. I think because she went against some core programming. This is heavy speculation, so take it with a grain of salt. My pet theory is, after the events of Security Breach and like during the events of Ruin, when the animatronics are kind of more animalistic and they're just listening to hurt anything nearby, Roxy is doing that, and she's doing that to kids. Like, she does it, like, technically it's not canon because the canon ending is one of the endings of Ruin, but theoretically earlier in the game when you're caught by Roxy, she kills you. It's that moment where she snaps out of it. And I think it's that moment where Cassie's like calling out and Roxy recognizes Cassie, and recognizing a child snaps back into the core programming of the Glamrock, which is, oh, this is a child, I have to keep her safe, I have to make her happy, so on and so forth, especially because she recognizes Cassie. So I think in that moment, Roxy snaps out of Glitchtrap's control, which is why then, before we go on to the final area, Glitchtrap is like, hey, I found one more security node. You need to deactivate Roxy. Because like I've seen people be like, oh, that's weird that Roxy's a security node. She's not. I don't think Roxy is a security node. Think about the puzzles that we do all throughout the game. They're like complex puzzles. They're like and I assume it's a stand-in for like encryption, like we're hacking some kind of encryption thing. And then you get to Roxy and it's just dragging one line across. That doesn't seem encrypted to me. To me, that seems like we're just hitting an off switch. Like with Sun and Moon, we reset his system with the wrench and we literally reboot him. We're doing the same thing to Roxy. Whereas Glitchtrap just wants us to shut Roxy off because he's lost control of her. That's probably why when we find her, she's underneath a forklift. Do you really think Roxy got into that on her own? Or rather, earlier in the game, Glitchtrap turned on one of the go-karts to try to run us over, meaning that some of the vehicles in this building can be accessed by Glitchtrap. A vehicle like the forklift that ran over Roxy. The only thing Glitchtrap can't do, apparently, is remotely shut her down. You need that Faz wrench. So I think it makes the most sense that Glitchtrap is like, Roxy's gone rogue, her AI is back, I need to shut her off, and maybe we'll bring her back eventually to be back in my animatronic servant army or whatever. So once she's near a forklift, Glitchtrap turns it on, runs her over. But eventually she's going to get out, so we need to make sure she's shut down. Well, there's a kid who believes everything we say. Let's just tell her to shut her off, and then we do it. I think that makes way more sense than Roxy being a secret security node. However, then you could argue, if she is just a robot and we shut her off, how does she turn back on and get all the way downstairs without being possessed? You got me. I have no answer for that. I have no idea. I don't think it's possession, but I can't offer you a better answer besides just it made for a cool moment. I don't know. I mean, it could be the fact that when we did that to Sun Moon, we didn't shut off Sun Moon. We just rebooted them. So maybe Glitchtrap sees that we do a thing and Roxy shuts off, but we didn't shut Roxy off. We just set her for a hard reboot. And now that she reboots in safe mode, she's fully disconnected from Glitchtrap, and Glitchtrap doesn't even know she's back turned on again. So maybe that's it, but I don't have a better answer than that, and that's pure speculation. But those, I think, are the easy answers for what is possessed in Security Breach. The harder questions are things like, okay, what about the Blob? Right? The Tangle, if you will. That big, wiry animatronic mass in the basement of Security Breach that we see escaping at the beginning of Ruin. Is that possessed? And that, I would say, is a lot more nuanced of a conversation. Because it hinges on, do you think William's research was fully correct? Right? In the blueprints for the scooper we get in FNAF 6, it mentions that Remnant, if heated, is dormant, right? If you keep Remnant in a heated liquid state, it's dormant. But it has a note that overheating may cause the effects to permanently diminish. So the thinking goes that Henry, when he found that blueprint, got the idea of the FNAF 6 fire and just thought, if I can burn these things hot enough for long enough, I can get rid of the Remnant and let these souls be free. So the question then becomes, was William right? And did Henry's plan work? As of now, I don't know if we have enough evidence to say either way. Because on one hand, I would like to say William was right. The Remnant has burned away, but the melted mass of animatronics left there is still infested with agony, something that, as far as I'm aware, we don't know what gets rid of agony. So heat may not have affected it, and now it's this massive pile of wires and animatronics possessed by agony, just lashing out at everything near it. That's possible. But if William was wrong, this same exact thing can be said about Remnant, and the Remnant is just still there and possesses the melted pile of animatronics that is still there. And it's so animalistic because that's like 10 people at this point. You know, it's a huge mass of communication. Ennard, which was only 6 people while it was Ennard, was this like weird, wiry, can barely walk right thing. So imagine that, but add like a couple more people on and don't give it a solid form and make it all melty. Of course it's going to act like the Blob. So when it comes down to it, it's really just a matter of what you personally believe for now, because I can't find any evidence either way. I will say it's notable that its eyes are fully black and that all of the tendrils and like animatronic parts are also pretty like dark black, which is typical of what we've seen in the books when something is infested or created by agony. Not all the time, but we've seen that a lot, that like Remnant is this silvery substance because it's metal and it's usually associated with light, like in FNAF AR, but the agony is more like darker tones like blacks and purples, like again we see in FNAF AR, but we also see it in some of the Fazbear Fright stories. So because of that, when I look at the Blob's character design, I do see the point that it is agony because of those darker tones. But that's really all I got. It's one of those things where I'm like, I don't definitively know if the Blob or the Tangle is possessed, but I'm willing to bet that it is corrupted with agony, maybe not Remnant. And then part of that would be the other agony that happens here, right? Not necessarily just the FNAF 6 agony, but in Tales from the Pizzaplex, we get those stories about how there are like piles of animatronic parts made by the Mimic. The Mimic like rips apart a whole crew of workers and piles them up. So that would cause a lot of agony, and I'm sure would go into the Blob. You know what I mean? Especially, I think it was Demuted that brought up every time or very often when those piles are brought up, they're described as a tangle of animatronic parts or a tangle of human body parts. And then in the Files of Ruin, the Blob is called the Tangle. So that's a pretty good connection there. So I think agony makes a lot of sense for the Blob, personally. So I guess, yes, it's possessed, but not by a spirit, if that makes sense. Then the other question, the big one that is the center point of most modern FNAF timeline debates. What about Burntrap and the Mimic? Because, I mean, part of that debate is, are they the same thing? Which I tend to think they are. I think it makes a lot of sense. If something like the Burntrap ending happens at the end of Security Breach, maybe the Blob just kind of takes off, like grabs Burntrap and tries to take it into itself, and the Mimic endoskeleton maybe breaks out of that, but whatever was on it is absorbed into the Blob. I could see that. I'm not sure. Or, frankly, another entirely separate option, they're not the same thing. So, I talked about this in one of my recent videos. I don't remember. I think it was the ending of Security Breach is changed by Help Wanted 2. But there's that bit in Ruin where we get to the FNAF 6 basement and we get outside the Mimic's lair. And through visual storytelling, we're pretty sure we know how the Mimic was captured, because there's a ventilation shaft that connects to the room it's in, outside of the room it's in, that is actively collapsed. Outside that vent is a backpack with Gregory's name on it, and the door is sealed with cement. The cement bags are right there. Sorry for all the cuts. I've got cat fur just floating around me, and it keeps getting in my nose, and I have allergies, so I don't want to like have a podcast recording where I'm just rubbing my nose the whole time. But if my nose is red, it's because I keep rubbing it. So the visual storytelling kind of tells us that Vanessa and Gregory lure the Mimic into that room. Notably, the Mimic is shown in the books to follow sound. FNAF just did a whole video based on that concept with the sticky notes and everything else. So Gregory likely is the one who went into that room, lured the Mimic in, and crawled through the ventilation shaft, collapsing it on the way out. So now they've got the Mimic in the room, Vanessa shuts the door, and they cement over it. If that's true, it would more than likely have to happen before Security Breach. Because after Security Breach, they're either not going back or the place is already collapsed and they probably can't get back. So to me, it would make the most sense that the Mimic was trapped there while Gregory was still GGY and while Vanessa was still Vanny. So I could totally understand if the Mimic is for some reason either delivered to or was already in the FNAF 6 area. When they get there, the direction from Glitchtrap isn't, "Ooh, that's useful, go use it." The direction is, the Mimic could be incredibly useful in your mission to give me a new body. However, it is incredibly dangerous, so it should only be used when you are ready to, or if necessary. For now, trap it. And that's what they do. So they get down there, they trap the mimic into that room, seal it off, and they go, okay, let's see if we can do anything else before we use the mimic. And that is where they find the corpse of William Afton, the burnt, charred corpse, Burntrap. So my thinking right now is that Burntrap is the charred remains of Scraptrap after the FNAF 6 fire that Vanny and GGY are trying to fix up to put Glitchtrap into. The goal is, okay, this is the safest option we have. Let's fix this thing up, charge it, and put Glitchtrap into it. And at some point in that process, GGY wakes up and it's Gregory again. Security breach happens. That being said, in that idea, Burntrap would be possessed. No. It goes back to the Blob again. It always goes back to the idea of we don't know enough about Agony and Remnant. It comes down to, was William right? Because if Burntrap is Scraptrap post FNAF 6 fire, then was all of the Remnant burned away and all is left is an agony-fueled skeleton? Or was the Remnant not burned away and they're trying to collect as much as they can to put it back together? Honestly, I could even see that Burntrap was originally part of the Blob, but meticulously taken out of it by Vanny and GGY in the process of bringing Afton back. So it comes down to it. I will say, even more than the Blob, Burntrap does share some design qualities that make it seem like it's more an agony creature than Remnant. The eyes are pitch black with those purple dots in the middle, and it has some other like purple and like blackish tones to it, which could just be a nod to William to try to like tell the player more, but I think it's worth noting. And I think that does also make sense with like why it just kind of walks around hitting buttons trying to kill things instead of like, I'm back, I'm going to kill. It doesn't talk to us, you know? Maybe that the voice in one of the first trailers was originally Burntrap, but as far as we know in the official game, Burntrap doesn't speak. I don't know. I think Burntrap would be more likely to be Agony. And if that's the case, and Burntrap isn't the mimic, maybe when it's scooped up by the Blob, it stays in there. And now that mass of agony is on the loose with William's agony inside of it. You know, that could honestly explain why the Blob doesn't escape for all of Security Breach, but does escape during Ruin. It knew part of itself was still in the FNAF 6 location. And once it got a hold of it, now it's whole again and it's leaving. That's actually not a bad idea. I might run with that. And then the question on everyone's mind, okay, if Burntrap isn't the mimic, what the fuck is the mimic? I'm honestly not sure. Obnoxious in chat on Saturday's theory like pre-show stream brought up the idea that if Edwin Murray isn't actually in the games and he's meant to be a parallel for one of the in-game characters, what if Edwin Murray is instead not Henry, but a parallel for Cassie's dad? A single father, as we see in the story, who loves Fazbear, which Edwin does seem to enjoy these characters, who is a whiz with technology. We know Cassie's dad was a technician. The timing would be kind of messed up because Edwin Murray is like an old man by the time of the Pizzaplex, and Cassie's dad doesn't seem like he would be since Cassie is so young. But it's a very good point to think about. The only issue with it would be if it seems like the mimic is pretty old. So I think to make the most sense, I think the mimic would need to be created by someone earlier in the timeline. Especially because of how old and dated the Mexis machine is. I don't know if I brought this up, but the Mexis machine, whether or not is on purpose, is designed and seems to be inspired a lot by the machine from War Games. Let me look it up real quick. Yeah, no, I think it has to be on purpose, like a direct homage. And it even makes sense kind of with the parallel of Mexis to the machine in war games is called Whopper, WOPR, a War Operation Plan Response. And the idea of the machine is it's an artificial intelligence that will give us the best course of action in all war-related ideas. And it starts going rogue, and it has to be out. I think in the movie, it's the kid who is the main character tricks it into doing a never-ending problem and getting confused or whatever. It does tic-tac-toe so much, I think it is, and it ends up being it'll always be a draw or something. It's been a long time since I watched it, but the movie came out in 1983, I believe, somewhere in the 80s, and the technology is very 70s, 80s. And when you compare these two things, I promise you, Google WOPR war games and tell me that doesn't just look like the Mexis machine. So that being said, the Mimic, and by extension Mexis, seem to have been created in the 80s, 90s kind of time of FNAF, possibly the 70s. So that does make me hesitate for Cassie's dad to be Edwin. That's my only hesitation, because Edwin is the creator of the Mimic in the books. So if Edwin isn't a character in the games, whoever created the Mimic needs to also, whoever is the parallel for Edwin, if Edwin isn't just in the games and we haven't met him yet, needs to have been old enough to make the Mimic, which is why I tend to lean towards Henry, because I do think that makes a lot of sense. And I know there's a lot of people that just think it is just straight up Edwin and we haven't met him yet, which is super possible. It is super possible that it's just a guy we haven't met yet. But I think it's one of those things that until we get solid evidence to point us in either way, it's just a fun kind of brain exercise of okay, well, if it isn't Edwin, who that we know of could it be? Because if every answer to a lore question is, oh, wait 3 games and we'll have the answer, then why am I here doing this? What's the point of doing theories if every answer to every question is, we haven't seen it yet? The idea is, okay, can we answer these questions with the information we have now? Let's try our best. And when a new game comes out, we'll reevaluate. That's how this shit works. So that being said, is the Mimic haunted? I, for a while, was saying no. I think the Mimic doesn't need to be possessed, right? The idea that it's artificial intelligence that learns from what it sees, and the Mimic program was put inside of Help Wanted, and now it acts like Glitchtrap. That makes sense. So the Mimic endoskeleton, it must have done or experienced something to make it act the way it does. That makes sense. And we see that in the books. The books give their version of that. But interestingly enough, there's something that, while we're talking about possession and all that, because Glitchtrap is another one that I guess I'll throw him on. And is Glitchtrap possessed, or is it just AI? As far as I'm aware, with the Mimic endoskeleton, I don't think it has any remnant possessing it. However, there is a possibility of agony. Because even in the books, it seems as though the Mimic was infested with agony when Edwin beat the shit out of it. So it's totally possible the Mimic in some way was infected with agony. Notably, real quick, before we move on to Glitchtrap, because this is a really interesting point I want to get into. Notably, now that I think about it, for the people who think that Glamrock Freddy, this is a question. So a question to y'all. For the people who think that Glamrock Freddy is possessed by Michael Afton, do you think that either Burntrap or the Mimic is possessed by William Afton via the same idea? That if Michael Afton is able to possess something after the FNAF 6 fire, what about Elizabeth, Charlie, the Missing Child Incident Kids, and William Afton? What about them? They're also still around, right? Or are you saying that only Michael was able to? If so, why? That's my question. Because if Glamrock Freddy shows up and Michael Afton is immediately finally, and possesses something good, could William Afton just have possessed Burntrap or even the Mimic by that logic? It's an interesting note. But the way the Mimic acts, I think it is just AI, especially It seems to have some purpose that we're not aware of, which maybe the agony is the reason for it. But if the mimic was possessed, I don't think it would still try to be Gregory in front of Cassie. Because obviously, like, once the jig is up, the mimic goes to kill Cassie to get out. But there's that moment where the mimic's literally crouched in the back of the room and it's doing the I'm Gregory thing, standing up saying I'm Gregory. I'm like, okay, this feels like a robot, not something that's possessing a robot. But granted, there's not a lot of evidence either way. A lot of this comes down to we don't have direct evidence, so what feels the most likely and can you back it up? But the interesting point about Glitchtrap, and I'm going to transition to questions now. I know it's a little early, but I kind of covered all of our bases. And this is still kind of on topic, so, But if you have any questions that you want answered on the podcast, you can send them to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. I know I said that really fast. It's on screen. It's also in the description. It's Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. You can copy and paste it to make it easier for you. If you're on Spotify, there should be a Q&A on Spotify you can answer that I also pull questions from. But our first question is actually on topic, so I wanted to bring it up now. It's from Emily, she, her. Thank you for your question. My question is about what you said in the episode about making a timeline, about FNAF's theory, saying that the green chip from Baby being scanned and becoming the Mimic program. You said you were not sure how the Mimic knew so much about William Afton's family life. Do you think it's possible that some of that knowledge came from Elizabeth Afton because the chip was originally part of Baby? That is an excellent point. Because one thing that seems pretty likely is the Mimic is trying to recreate the Afton family. And another thing that seems pretty likely from what we can see is the Mimic doesn't really know who William Afton was, but just has like an idea of William Afton and is chasing that idea. So the idea that the information about William Afton came from Elizabeth's perspective makes a lot of sense, right? It's not that I learned from William Afton because I was a part of William Afton. It's the Mimic learned about William Afton from seeing William Afton from the eyes of Elizabeth. So this perfect man who we need to recreate because he'll make things right. That makes a lot of sense. There are some problems with it because, again, we're not even sure that the green chip is the right thing, but I think it is pretty likely. I think that's a great observation by John. And there's also the idea that, like, it's taken out of Circus Baby, but Elizabeth remains in Circus Baby. So, like, when did this knowledge transference happen? How much knowledge? Is it just the Mimic program? Is it literally like a computer chip that has the Mimic program on it? There's a lot of knowledge we don't have. But I think that's a great way to interpret it. I just realized I grabbed 2 different Emilys. That's very funny. We'll get to the other one later. God, my nose is itchy. Sorry for all the frequent cuts. It's allergy season. I have cats, so my nose is just so itchy today. But it's one of those questions I don't really have a lot to say about because I just agree with it. I think that's a great point. So good job. Thank you for your question. And we'll move on to our next question from Megan, she, her. Thank you for your question. What is the, if any, lore significance with the similarities between Carnie, Lefty, and Rockstar Freddy? Thank you for your question, Megan. I think there's significant, especially Carnie and Lefty, and we'll get into that. But I guess we'll get into that right now. I think it's literally telling us that Lefty is a repurposed Carnie. If we're thinking about Henry doing FNAF 6, we don't know. Like, obviously, he had to have some money and resources at his disposal to make all of this, but we don't know how much. So I'm sure the need to cut corners arose, and the idea of repurposing something you've already made makes a lot of sense. Now, here's an interesting point. Lefty sure functions a lot like a fun time, doesn't he? The idea of a robot specifically created to kidnap something. I made the argument. I'm not the only one. I made the argument. I know She's Always Nervous also made this argument. I'm pretty sure, again, John FNAF made this argument a while ago, that there's a possibility that Henry was the one that made the fun times. And in doing FNAF 6, and he makes Lefty, if it's a repurposed Carnie, oh man, brain blast. You ready for it? Follow this rabbit hole. I might end up saying nonsense by the end of it, but just walk with me. Bake with me, if you will. If Henry was the one who made the Funtime animatronics. And if I'm right, and the Funtime animatronics were originally characters from Fall Fest that were repurposed for Circus Baby's Party World or Pizza World or whatever, if that's true, Carnie seems to be another Fall Fest character. So, if Carnie is a repurposed Lefty, and we know for a fact that Henry built Lefty, it's like one of those speculations that is so concrete and evidence-backed, it is nearly confirmed. Technically, you could argue that we don't know for certain where Lefty came from. But the idea of a robot specifically built to capture the marionette that is used in FNAF 6, the thing we know for a fact Henry did create, I'd say it's asinine to argue against it, unless you have some pretty damn strong evidence. So if we know for a near fact that Henry built Lefty, and Help Wanted 2 seems to present that Carnie is a repurposed Lefty. And I keep saying that because not only do they look practically identical, in Help Wanted 2, they are in the exact same pose in the character gallery. And why would they do that? Carnie already has a pose, being at the booth. They didn't have Carnie at the booth, they have Carnie posed exactly like Lefty, in a very specific pose. So if Carnie is a repurposed Lefty, and Carnie, most likely, is a character from Fall Fest, this is even more evidence that the sister location animatronics, and possibly other animatronics in the series, were Fall Fest characters that were transformed into animatronics, which further backs up the idea that Henry built the Funtimes. It's a really interesting point. And I was arguing that Henry built the Funtimes and William modified them to kidnap children. But if Henry built Lefty, a robot that is capable of kidnapping the marionette, did he learn that from the sister location blueprints that William created, or was he the one who helped build the Funtimes? How innocent is Henry? It's interesting, right? Because when you think about William and Henry, the books kind of paint this picture of Henry is this naive, do-nothing-wrong scientist. But at the same time, he does build a robot to kill him because he can't do it himself. And he does make the Charlie bots, which seems like a severe breach of trust. Especially, imagine, like, I know he's a grieving, broken man, but imagine the psyche of someone who would create robotic replica of life, and then as the only person who knows that, ending your own. Imagine the sheer selfishness of doing the things that Henry does in the books. Hear me out. I don't know how likely this is. Probably not likely at all, and there's probably some piece of evidence I'm forgetting that disproves this. But does Henry know that William killed Charlotte? Because if Henry doesn't know William did it, and the crying child is killed at Freddy's, or at Fredbear's, and he knows that somehow, with technology, he can bring back the crying child, but he knows Henry is the one who's better at building it. But Henry would never agree to create the Funtime, something that would kidnap and harm other children, especially in some vain attempt to create life that's insane. But what if William made Henry desperate for the answers too? What if William killed Charlotte so that in Henry's eyes, not only did the crying child die, but now Charlotte is dead too? He'd have a vested interest in bringing someone back. That's interesting. Oh, shit. Maybe nobody in this timeline is good. Huh. Again, like, I don't know how likely that is, and I'm just kind of brainstorming, so there could be a piece of evidence that's like, no, that can't happen for XYZ. But in the moment, I can't think of anything. And that's a pretty compelling arc of like William always wanting to be able, like William always being a little messed up. And after the death of the crying child, being desperate to bring him back and being willing to kill Charlotte just so Henry would want to bring back children too. And using Michael, and like the idea of William using and corrupting the people around him for his own goals. Michael, Henry, Elizabeth to an extent. That's really interesting. I just realized I've been here this whole time, and I don't know how that's going to sound on the recording. So hopefully that didn't sound shitty, because that was a really important part of the podcast. Oops, I didn't realize. I got so lost in train of thought, I forgot that I have to be here to be picked up correctly by the microphone. So hopefully that sounded good. I don't know. I'll find out later. That's really interesting. I didn't even consider that. So I guess thank you for your question, Megan. Oops. That was a train of thought. I have 2 more questions. The recording is at 43 minutes. I took a couple breaks, so I wouldn't doubt if it's like only 35, 38 minutes. So I guess we'll do both of, we have 2 more questions, so we'll do them. Our next one comes from Emily. Thank you for your questions. What are your thoughts on Old Man Consequences and what he represents? Do you think he'll become more relevant in the current story, or do you think he's already doing something? Thank you for your question. Truthfully, I have no idea. Old Man Consequences is one of those characters who, like, when FNAF World came around, I'm like, okay, this is a metaphor for, like, God or something, and then move on. And then Ultimate Custom Night, I'm like, okay, maybe it's Henry? And then Princess Quest comes out, and I'm pretty sure the Old Man in Princess Quest, either one of the files called him Old Man Consequences, or it's just, there was something that linked him to Old Man Consequences besides the coloring. I don't remember what, though. But if the guy from Princess Quest is also Old Man Consequences, what is going on? Especially in Help Wanted 2, where it's like the English of Old Man Consequences is like kind of broken and weirdly written out with no grammar. I don't know. Especially, oh man, not even considering if the Old Man from Princess Quest is Old Man Consequences, the end of Help Wanted 2 is crazy. We go up to Old Man Consequences, we trade the Vanny Mask, and we get the Glitchtrap plushie, and he's like, it is a fair trade. What do you mean? I have no idea. That is something that is just, it's so cryptic, I really don't know. Maybe it's Henry in some weird way. Maybe it's just a motif that Scott likes to use that represents like the afterlife. I don't know. It is very strange. So I'm just going to be brutally honest. Thank you for your question. I have no idea. But I hope those musings can help you. And finally, White Wolf, he, him. Thank you for your question. And finally, our last question from White Wolf, he, him. Just wanted to ask, when starting a FNAF channel, what videos should I make first? Should I start making a timeline or stating my opinions on lore details, or just come up with my own theories? Thank you for your question. There's no right way to do it. I think starting with a timeline is commendable, but it's one of those things that it's such a big project that it might be too intimidating and you might not finish it. So with any YouTube channel, the best way to start is by making videos. And I say this every time, your videos are going to be really bad for a long time. And they're going to, like, everyone is bad at videos until they get better at it. And the only way to get better at making videos is making videos. So I would say, don't expect instant success and just start making videos, and eventually they'll get pretty good. I think starting with a timeline is a fun idea because you can see where your thoughts start and how they transform over talking it out for so long. But at the same time, like I said, that's a pretty menacing goal. So if you think you're up to it, go for it. There's no harm in just making videos and just being like, hey, what about this one weird detail? Make a video on it, and the more you make videos, the better you'll get at making videos. So, just do it, I don't have a lot of better advice for something like that besides just, if you want to make a YouTube channel, you just got to start doing it. Now, MatPat has a great point where if you're launching a YouTube channel, launching one with 5 or so videos is a great idea to really start the beginning of it. If this is the first time you've ever made YouTube videos, maybe don't do that. Because again, I fall back on the same idea of like, if you are stuck to, I don't want to launch this channel without 5 videos in the bank, you might never start that channel. That being said, that's also great practice to like make a couple videos, look at them, see what you could do better and do again, but don't get stuck doing that forever. You know, there's the idea of like never releasing your art because you're scared it's not good enough. Don't end up doing that is something I definitely want to say. But yeah, I guess that'll be today's podcast episode. So thank you all for your questions so much. Again, if you want your questions answered on the podcast, send them to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That is, again, in the description to copy and paste because it is a pain to type. But until next time, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.